Good morning. A very good morning to all of you. I hope you like that little intro ditty that we've created. It's actually our own. We used AI tool and staff members all contributed to creating a ditty that we thought would actually be always related to all our events. So we hope you'll recognize it and jig to it wherever you are. And if you want a copy of it, we'll send it to you via email. My name is Dharmendra Kanani. I'm Chief Operating Officer and Chief Spokesman at Friends of Europe, and have the great pleasure of moderating this opening plenary. This session where we are fundamentally asking what kind of Europe do we want, do we need, and are we prepared to work towards? Our response to that question is the issue around what you will find in this publication, the renewed social contract, 10 policy choices that we've identified in this document. I hope you've had a chance to glance, look at least peer at, and give a view. Because in the entirety of this day, the reason why we brought you to this 20th edition of this roundtable is to think about what do we want from the new mandate? What do we want from the new EU mandate as of its kind of post-elections and the establishment of a new commission, a new parliament? What is it we should be asking them as public servants? Let's not forget, as public servants, what do we want from them? Before I kind of introduce some of the key contributors that we've identified, so what we've done is we've curated this session to identify a number of characters that are going to stimulate your thinking, help you reflect on where we are, and perhaps identify some potential solutions or ideas for change and progress as we move ahead. And as a think tank, one of the issues that we've been thinking about a lot, obviously, in the past years, and especially in this past 24, 36 months, is the organism of government rotten? Is it beyond repair? Have we got any possibility of being able to bring it back to a place where public service, integrity, authenticity matters? When we think about what happened in the past couple of days, who'd have thought Portugal, come on, Portugal would collapse, and the level of, and when we think about corruption, etc., when we think about what's happening in other parts of Europe, how is it that when you actually, even if those of you, despite Brexit, those of you who are listening to the COVID inquiry, and you think about the excesses of power, the excesses of poor governance in terms of the treatment and the sense of public service at the highest level of government. And there's a sense that are we able to regain faith and trust amongst the people out there of you and those of you who are politicians, leaders in government? Because at the moment, when you think about it from a punter's point of view, watching what's happening across Europe and other parts of the world, they'll be thinking, oh my God, is it worth it? Is it worth actually engaging in the political process? Because actually nothing ever changes. One of the things that we've been reflecting on as we produce this document, and I want to thank a lot of you who are here that have contributed to this. This has been a crowdsourcing opportunity for us. We have worked with hundreds of people to really distill what the choices might be and should be. But it should be really clear, this isn't the end point. This is a discussion point, a discursive point. So you please do challenge them, engage with them, disagree with them if you wish, but give a view. What we're hoping is that we will launch the final report in February next year. I think one of the biggest questions that we need to be thinking about before I bring in one of our first contributors, and we're thinking about this a lot when we're having it on this journey. If you think about most of the institutions that we have in place, the international ones, a lot of the governance arrangements that have been put in place are post-World War II. Are they fit for purpose now? Is it time and is it right for us to change things? And I suppose there's a sense, and one of the things that we are saying as an organization is that we need to shift our system from a 1950s model, so from a 1950s model of thinking and working to a 2050 model. How do we make that leap That's the actual, if you like, the exam question or the leadership challenge amongst all of us. Is that how do you move from the 1950s, which is so steeped in how we are working at the moment, both in terms of how governments work, how our economies function, how we think about democracy, how we think about improving social mobility or reducing inequality. It's very much an old-style model. How do we actually change that? And I suppose systemically make sure we're able to do things differently, better, with a different kind of mindset. So that's kind of framing, if you like, for this discussion. As I said, I'll bring as many of you into this conversation as possible. As a reminder for those of you who are newbies, so welcome back, those of you who've been here before. For those of you who are new to this arrangement, everyone is equal around this room. Doesn't matter if you're a head of state, a minister, a civil servant, a head of a civil society organization, etc. and so forth. We treat you as equals. We want you all to contribute to this conversation. It is a brainstorm. And so what we want you to do is not have grandstanding speeches, but to engage. And the people that I'm going to bring in to curate this conversation, they're not here to answer your questions. They're here to actually add to the debate and discussion. And so that's what we're hoping to do, that we can engage in a conversation. This is not your traditional conference by any means. And those of you who've been here before know that only too well. I also want to point out that we have people throughout the day. We have people who have been involved from our Debating Europe, our democracy, our new democracy area of expertise in Friends of Europe. We have people who've been facilitating an engagement with citizens in 7 parts of Europe. We are going to launch a report called 2024 Citizens. So we're engaging with 2,024 citizens across Europe. And we're doing this actively right now in 7 markets of Europe. And we have people who are facilitators in those areas who are going to be in and amongst us, who will raise their hand and say, actually, this is what people are telling us right now, because we're engaging with them right now. Across Europe. And that's our ambition, is that by beginning of next year, we'll have a report on 2024, so 2024 citizens that we'll have engaged with, to ask them what they think is important to them now, what they're experiencing and what they hope for the future. So that's I want to make sure that you know that they're here, and they will be raising hands, and I'll be bringing them out also into this conversation. So that's it. Without further ado, I want to be able to first invite James. James, where are you?
I'm over here.
Lovely. I'm going to speak to a man called James, who's done some amazing things in his time. And James, would you just share with us what motivated you to do what you're doing? And explain to people here who may not be aware of the kind of impetus or the motivation that happened post that first case that you took out, which was almost an act of, I suppose, truth to power, in a way. But over to you.
Well, I was not type of gig worker. In my career over the years has jumped from NGO side to technology and I was working at a startup, and I thought I'd be that type of gig worker, work for Uber, walls from the door while working in a startup. And that all changed one night when I was assaulted. I found that Uber would not identify who he said it was. The police demanded that I do so because they thought I was. So we started to look at contracts and find that I was in this kind of no man's land. I was either in control of my work or was I protected by an employment relationship. That's what started the case that ended up in the UK Supreme Court. The insight I learned from that was a few things. One, the story of that case was what was going to triumph. Statutory protections that all workers are if you're to be recognized as a worker, or commercial contracts if you're an independent contractor acting in commercial capacity. The UK Supreme Court rightly recognized gig workers as workers entitled to statutory protections. But then that starts a new challenge, which is one of concealed management control, concealed in algorithm. That is the new challenge. So we took a new round of cases under the GDPR, and we won those as well. Decisions that dismiss workers, decisions that have paid set up by machine learning, by profile, by artificial intelligence, by dynamic concerts and so on. But it is now fundamentally integrated into how gig platforms manage workers and how they price services to consumers. And that is going to be a big issue because the one thing that workers are entitled to almost everywhere is complete transparency over what you're going to be paid, how your work is going to be set for you, and how that contract is going to be managed, how your performance is going to be managed. And still, gig workers are struggling to get that clarity. I believe the Platform Workers Directive here in Europe that I think was being discussed by the Council last night, I'm not sure what the outcome will be a great step forward, but there's still, even if that is passed, there's still some very serious fundamental issues that have not yet been addressed.
Share with us, would you, whether you've been able to create some form of connectivity with other, let's say, platform working kind of groups or people that have similarly had experiences to yourself across Europe or elsewhere? Has there been that ability of creating community around your cause?
Certainly. I mean, in the United Kingdom, this was a group of workers that have been traditionally left behind by the trade union movement, service workers, many of them migrant workers. We built a union within 3 years that now has 8,500 active members. We believe it's the biggest single block of organised labour in Europe. So it can be done. Across Europe, we've coordinated. There's a group of workers cycling today between Paris and Brussels to lobby for a good Platform Workers Directive, the International Alliance of App-Based Transport Workers. What all these workers have in common is a common business model. And this is the thing that's interesting, is that these platforms have hollowed out inside. They don't have really a local organization. They don't have a local function. This is a global automated management system. And so it's important that the workers organize globally also in response to that.
In terms of the kind of reaction you've had from governments, obviously you're a litigant. People see that you achieve your cause through litigation and have succeeded. What kind of reaction are you getting either from governments that you're approaching, but also, when you're beside corporates, do they kind of take a kind of body swerve when they look at you, think, "Oh my God, that's James. Let's move away"?
Well, I think governments have been too slow to understand this phenomena, where it came from, and where it's going to. For me, this all starts in October 2008.
Yeah.
In that month, 3 things happened. October 2007 was when the iPhone was launched. October 2008, the Apple App Store was opened and the Google Play Store was opened. But also in October 2008, the financial markets crashed. And within 6 months, interest rates were almost zero. And there's a flood of cash into Silicon Valley. And the gig economy was born from that because we saw public austerity. We saw people struggling to pay mortgages because of subprime. People were brought into debt that they couldn't handle. And at the same time, Silicon Valley was awash with cash. And so they thought, listen, the way out of your problems is to get a second job, get a third job, work 18 hours a day just to keep a roof over your head. And that's what the gig economy was for. Now, the interesting thing about the financial crash is that it was about misclassification. It was misclassification of risk in the financial markets. And now all we've done is we've misclassified risk in the labour markets because we're misclassifying workers as independent contractors when in fact they're workers. And so what we've also seen is this sort of post-truth era populism that's come from that financial crash era as well. It's come into the labour market. This idea of pretending that an employment relationship under management control is really booking entrepreneurship is a lie. It's a post-truth phenomena. And so we have to get over that and understand where this has come from. These platforms rely on public welfare programs.
Yeah.
So lots of people working in the gig economy, certainly in Britain, they work full-time but cannot make ends meet, and so rely on welfare support in order to survive. So that's a wage subsidy for these platforms. But also, I think what's very sad is the wastefulness of this promise of technology. Technology should bring good things to life, But here we have an oversupply, the lure of large numbers, as the platforms call it. So we have about 50% more people working in the industry than it can sustain. They are not paid for their waiting time, even though the courts have recognized that they should be. So this magic of technology is not technology at all. It's transaction layer innovation. It's a use and abuse of labor. The only way that you can get your food delivered in 15 minutes from a supermarket is if there's an excess of people waiting to do that, and they're not paid while they're waiting to do that. And that's causing congestion, it's causing poverty, and it doesn't need to be like that. In real-time technology should be really efficient at allocating labor just as it does capital, so that people who invest their time and labor in that work get a fair return just as investors would. Until that changes, I think we'll be trapped in precarity. And by the way, the last thing I would say is Andy Haldane, who was with the Bank of England some years ago, wrote a paper about the dragging effect on our economy of utilising labour in this way. You know, you're locking in underproductivity into our economy by choosing policies that support that kind of economic activity. It isn't fair, it isn't reasonable, and it's bad for all of us.
Sure. I mean, my final question to you, I mean, an aside to what you're saying is, what we do know is that there's the development of what you've just described post-2008, with the whole kind of introduction of an online world, if you like, and connectivity. We're seeing that, you know, places in China and India in particular, cheap supply of labor, and able to, you know, field calls and do a number of things. There's almost a sense that how do our global agreements catch up with that kind of phenomenon, if you like, that you're describing? But what's the one ask you have of the new mandate, of the new EU mandate? If there was one thing you wanted, because I'm going to ask everyone that, by the way, just to warn you, is that what is it you'd want?
I want recognition and protection of the social model of employment, because it has been the concept of employment, something that we, you know, what we're doing really here, you talked about 1950, let's go back to 1850. You know, at that time we had a gig economy. It lived well on the docks in London, in Liverpool, in Belfast. People came along for a day's work. They even wore badges, you know, to signify how good of a worker you are. That's the same as the star rating we have today. So the gig economy just simply brings us back to where we were before we had employment rights, before we had the new industrial movement in the turn of the last century. If we need to, you know, we need to think, do we want to protect and preserve the social and employment model we have, or do we want to tear it up? But there's no point in pretending that technology has changed, you know, that technology has fundamentally broken that. This is old wine in new bottles. We have to make a decision whether or not we're going to preserve these decent employment terms, or we're going to tear them up.
I suppose some people will think that's just loony left politics, and we can't afford it, and the world's moved far more forward than what you characterise. And there is this dilemma that when you talk immediately about a social model or a welfare net, there's a whole clump of people who just turn off and want to walk away and think, oh gosh, really? And we can't afford it. But so, I mean, I want us to all think about that, because you might think that what I'm saying is that's not the case, but you know genuinely that if we genuinely believed in a social model and wanted it to work, we'd have stuff in place by now. And I think what happened during COVID was the biggest reminder of what happens when you have crises, that someone has to step in, and it's the taxpayer, the public taxpayer, who basically underwrote societies across the board, whether that was people who work in the private sector or the public sector. So thank you for your contribution. I want all of us to kind of engage in that dialogue about what do we want and what kind of model is possible, because some of us will sit around and say, yes, it's really important to have a social welfare model, but secretly you're thinking, that's really, you know, politicians who wants to win a game is really not going to be up for making the strident moves that we're required to do redistribution. And what does that mean?